Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Insider's View on Admissions. I'm often asked the question, what happens after I submit my application? What happens when I hit the submit button? Well, we want to demystify that process for you today and reveal insights into the admissions process and offer you a few tips along the way. At the end of the session, you should feel comfortable understanding how schools review applications and how to strengthen your own given the process. I'm Natalie Grimblatt, and I've been a consultant at Accepted for over 15 years, helping clients get into dozens of schools, including Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, MIT, Booth, you name it, my clients have gotten in. I have also spent 19 years in business school admissions, leading the admissions teams at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business, Cornell's Johnson School, and ASU Carey School as an admissions director and dean. I want to introduce my esteemed colleagues to you. I've known both of these ladies for quite some time. We used to travel together in admissions. Dr. Christy St. John joined Accepted 3 years ago. She has been in higher ed and admissions for 25 years, including 10 years in admissions at Dartmouth Tuck School. She's also a former director of MBA admissions and recruiting, director of international relations, and an adjunct faculty member at Vanderbilt's Owens School. Kelly has been a consultant with Accepted for nearly 2 years. She was the former executive director of admissions at Carnegie Mellon's Tepper School. She's been the assistant director of admissions at Georgetown's McDonough School and the University of Pittsburgh's Katz School. Kelly has 23 years of experience overseeing admissions committees and has reviewed over 38,000 applications for the MBA and master's programs in the management of information systems, computational finance, business analytics, and product management. So we have a unique perspective as former admissions directors that we want to share with you. We have insider knowledge into the process because we've done it. We have experience with a holistic review, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit later, what to expect from a holistic review. We have strategic insight into what happens behind the scenes and what admissions directors look for. We have experience with essay and interview coaching, understanding trends and changes, network and resources. We also fall under ethical guidance. Many of us belong to AGAC, but as admissions directors, there are certain things that you need to understand in terms of what is ethical and what is not with admissions. The other thing that we do is we reduce a lot of stress in the process. We have a passion for education and a commitment to student success. And we've been through this the same way you have been. So Christy has a PhD, Kelly has an MBA and a Master's of Science, and I too have an MBA. The first thing we're going to talk about today is application processing. We want to discuss the initial steps to that process and how applications are organized. So Christy, why don't you start and talk a little bit about what happens when someone hits the submit button at a school like Vanderbilt and Dartmouth?
Well, the first thing that happens is that all the documents are downloaded, and then there's a checklist. So we have back office people who work on that, and they will send you an automatic email if your letter of recommendation is missing, if your transcript is illegible, anything. So they will keep you up to date on what's there and what isn't there. They'll let you know if your test score has been received. You can see the checklist so you know exactly what's happening. Once all those documents come in, then it will be sent on to one of the associate directors, and they will quickly scan through the file, make sure everything's there, and decide after looking quickly at your test scores, transcripts, and resume, as well as your essays, Do we want to interview this person? Is this person a likely candidate for our school? If the answer is yes, then it goes on and you get an invitation to interview. And once you get that, you know that you've passed the biggest hurdle. And it's up to you to make that interview your inside to the school admissions. If you don't get an interview invitation, it means that something's possibly wrong. Now, a lot of schools will not give you any feedback until after all 3 or 4 rounds are done. So you can check with them in May and they'll tell you. Some schools won't. They say, we just don't have the time. We can't do it. You figure out what's wrong. And generally, you know what that is. You know, you've either got really terrible grades and you didn't explain it. Maybe your test scores weren't good. You didn't explain the why of that. Maybe your goals are totally unfeasible and the school is not going to be able to help you get that where you want to be. But that's basically, and then once you've got the interview, it goes back to the committee, and the committee, it gets read usually 3 times at Vanderbilt and Tuck by 3 different people. So you don't have one person making all the decisions. And at both those schools, we made decisions in committee. We all voted. So that good?
Kelly, yeah, thank you. Kelly, what was the process at Georgetown and Carnegie Mellon?
Yeah, sure. A lot of similarities with what Christy stated. I would say the one thing that stands out to me that's a bit different is once your application is complete, so there is a processor who looks at the applications to make sure everything's legible and all of the documents are received. But we would take a look at data points from the applications literally the week that applications were submitted, and would make an initial interview invitation based off of data points. That allowed us, if you think of it as a manufacturing process, that allows us to use early capacity more quickly, because our goal at both schools was to interview as many people as we could who were admissible. And so we would start that process by inviting a group to interview very quickly, and then we would read the group that hadn't yet been invited. We would read that group first. And so every week, as we met with an admissions committee, if someone hadn't been interviewed yet, but their file was brought to committee, they would get invited to interview if the initial reader thought that they should be invited to interview and the committee agreed. So we had interview invitations going out every week after that. And quite literally, that could go on until the week before the decision deadline. So the interview invitation, whether it was immediate or clear to the date that you would get your admission decision, it didn't matter, and nothing should be read into the timing of it. It was just the process that allowed us to get as many people interviewed as we could.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And at Ross and Cornell, we had a similar kind of read that Christy had, with a little caveat. So the very first thing we did was make sure the application was complete. If it wasn't complete, you were notified and you had time to make it complete. You were still looked at in that round. Okay, so if you're incomplete in round 1, you'll be read in round 1. Some schools don't do that. Some schools move you to the next round. So you need to make sure that your application is complete. Once the application was complete, we actually had student readers. So we had student readers that were broken down by area of the country, by we had them look at people that came from similar backgrounds to them, and they gave us some insights. From there, it went on to an assistant director and associate director. If those 2 people agreed, we went ahead and interviewed, or if they didn't interview, it came up for committee. Okay. And then if they agreed, we went ahead and invited them to interview. And then after the process, we reviewed the application again. If you have any questions at all about this process, please go ahead and put your comments in the comment section and we will address those questions. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next part of this session. And we're going to talk about the components of the application, the pre-interview review, what we were discussing before. Okay, so Vishal, before I move on, Vishal has a question about an individual school and taking a look at your profile before applying. Well, the great thing is that accepted.com does a free complimentary 30-minute consultation with us, and you can go ahead and sign up with that. We are all former AdCom, so you can pick one of us to go ahead and sign up. The only schools that I know, Vishal, that will review your application ahead of time are actually MBA programs. But for a full-time program or a part-time program, you're not going to get an early read. If you want an early read, I'd say go ahead and sign up with one of us and we can take a look at your profile. Okay. We're not going to do that here because we're looking more holistically at everybody's questions. And speaking of holistic reviews, we're going to talk about the components. Okay. So, Kelly, why don't you tell me a little bit more about what goes into a holistic review and what the components are that you looked for in the application itself, not the resumes or test scores or references or essays. I want to know what you were looking for in the application.
Sure. So the holistic review is just that. Every component of the application is reviewed and considered when making the admission decision. And so, generally speaking, I think a hesitation people have is my application's not perfect. And so therefore, I shouldn't apply. I will tell you, and I think Natalie and Christy would agree, there are very, very few, if any, perfect applications. And so when we're doing the holistic review, we will look for ways that the application might balance. One part might balance another. And we'll get into some of that in a moment. But that's the benefit of a holistic review. We wouldn't be just looking at one application or one component of the application and making a decision based on that. We really are looking at all parts of it. I mean, the reality is we all have growth areas. And so part of the MBA experience is to strengthen your professional and personal skills so that you're a stronger business person. And just to kind of allay the concerns that you have to have a perfect application. That said, you want to put together the strongest application that you can, and that's what we can help you with at Accepted. In terms of the written part of the applications, I would say one of the things that I would recommend that you do is make sure that you follow the instructions in the application itself. Make sure you're reading specifically what the school is looking for as you're filling out that application. There may be some nuances from one school to the next. So I think, we have a habit of kind of looking at a web page and just kind of jumping to assumptions of what we need to fill in the fields, but make sure you're reading that and following the instructions. And then and just understand the last, I think, part, bringing it back to the holistic review, understand that there's not one ideal student that a school is looking for. It really is a process where the committee is looking to admit a group of people who will positively impact the community in different ways. And so with that, I'll turn the floor back over to you, Nat.
Okay. Christy, do you have anything to add to that, to the holistic review?
I think, that a lot of people are under the misconception that we only look at test scores. And that is so not true. I know that all of us have rejected people with 790, 800 GMAT scores because either their goals were out of line with what their experience was, or because they were not going to be a good fit. And a fit is something that you have to really talk to the students at the school and alums and get a feel for it yourself, because it's a very abstract concept, but it's quite important to the schools, especially those of us who were at smaller schools. It may not matter so much at Harvard with 1,000 students, but it certainly did at Dartmouth with 250 students. It does matter. So if you think that we're only looking at your test scores, you are terribly, terribly wrong. The whole thing is there for a reason.
And so why don't you use that and take us into how we review resumes and experience?
Resumes are my baby, because I used to do career services too. I love working with resumes. And the one thing that I see from quite a few clients, especially those in the tech field, is that your resume is totally unintelligible to anyone who's not also in the tech field. There is a difference between a resume that you're going to submit for a job and a resume that you're going to submit for business school. Both of them should show the impact that you've made, but the one for business school does not need to be technical. And I think I've told a couple of my clients this. Most people in admissions offices have backgrounds, some of them in MBAs, and they would understand bits of it, but you're not going to find anybody who's going to understand what you mean when you're talking about SQL, SAP, and all this, RStudio and all that. They don't care, because that's not why we're admitting you. We're admitting you on the basis of what impact you have made. How have you contributed to your company in a quantifiable way? And the resume basically is your sales document. This is going to tell us what you've done, what you know how to do. And from that, we can say, okay, you said you want to go and become a consultant with McKinsey. You have no client-facing work on your resume. They're probably not going to want to interview you. Or you might want to go into investment banking. You have no finance background. You have no accounting background. Yes, you will learn that in the MBA, but it's not a magic wand. So what we do at Accepted is to work with you on your resume, try to find out. We dig deep. I go line by line by line on resumes with my clients. And that way I can find out, what did you really do? I don't understand your gobbledygook technical stuff. Tell me what you really did. And once we get into that, we come up with great stories to use in your essays. We come up with great stories to use in interviews. And more than that, we make the resume very clear so that someone taking 60 seconds to look at it can say, okay, yeah, this person's he's got some good stuff here. That's the basic thing. And just remember that you're not trying to sell us for a tech job. You're trying to sell us on what you know and how you're going to contribute to the class overall with what you've done. I think that would you all agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. And the other thing that we look for in the experience that we find on the resume is, and also in your essays, is what are the problems that you want to solve using business tools, not technical tools, business tools. You're not applying for a master's in engineering when you're applying to an MBA program, unless you're applying for a dual program or a tech MBA. Then you can use the technical skills. But the big caveat for most schools is that we want to see what kind of problems you can solve using business tools. And so you need to change your resume just a tad with that. Kelly, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I would add, and Natalie, you and I were talking the other day, and we both kind of agreed with this. So, Christy, I'm curious, when you read an application, the way I would read it, the first document I would read would be the resume. And Natalie said that
I
was
did the same. Right. Yep.
It gives a nice overview, recap of your experience from college to the present. And really, for me anyway, kind of set the gave me a mindset of how I would then look through the rest of the application.
It also shows us whether you have been engaged and your university, because a lot of people say, I'm so busy. I work 80 hours a week. I don't have time to do any community service activities like that. And we understand that. But we look back at college. What did you do in college? Were you in clubs? Did you have any leadership positions there? Do you take on leadership positions at your work if there are possibilities that way? That's why the resume, again, should give us a complete picture of who you are, not just your work. You are not your job. Who are you outside of work too?
I'm going to add one more thing. When Christy's talking about a complete picture, that doesn't mean that you cram every achievement that you have into a resume. Most schools are requiring one-page resumes. I have a one-page resume, and I worked a lot longer than you have at many different jobs. So you need to make sure that you're highlighting the key achievements, the key impact that gives the committee an idea of how you've grown in your job and how you've added value to your organization, whether it's school or work. It needs to be clean. It needs to be easy to read. If it takes more than a minute to read, people aren't going to go past the first paragraph. So I'm just letting you know, it's got to be a quick read. If we're all doing it as the very first thing, it sets the tone for the rest of the application. Make sure that resume is spot on. Do you have any other comments on work experience, Christy?
No, I think a lot of people want to get an MBA right after they get out of undergrad because they want to start a family or whatever it is they want to do. And let's get school over with. And that is not how the MBA works. Most programs, top programs at least, want you to have work experience because this is how you understand A, what you are studying, and B, how you can contribute to the class discussions about cases. If you have never really worked other than maybe a little internship, you don't understand what you're going to be getting into when you're doing case studies. And this is really critical because you learn as much from your fellow students as you do from the professors. And I think we would all agree on that. And that's why we want you to understand. And the second reason is that companies are paying big salaries for people who know stuff already, who can hit the ground running. The MBA is icing on the cake, but you got to have the cake foundation first. And if you have nothing there but the pan that's empty, you're not going to get on those top lists. And you're doing yourself a huge disservice to try to jump into school too quickly.
Kelly, do you have anything else to add?
The only thing I would add is if you are someone who is in college or recently graduated from college and you want to do some educational work, look at a master's level program. You can do a master's in management, a tech related master's. And so those are opportunities as well, but save the MBA for after you have a bit of experience for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Before I move on to test scores, there's a few questions that I'm going to take. So Simon has a question specifically about Kellogg. Kellogg's process is different than the ones we mentioned. Kellogg interviews everybody. So it's a little bit different than a selective interview up front and then a selective interview on the back. And Simon, if you have additional questions specifically about Kellogg, feel free to contact one of us through Accepted. We're happy to answer that. But I'm not going to stay specifically with Kellogg. Just note that they are different than most other schools because they interview everybody.
Hey, Nat, can I add one thing for Simon?
Yeah.
So in terms of your interview, you should feel great after you interview. That's the interviewer's job, is to make sure, one of them, to make sure that you have a good experience. And so you're not going to know how they felt because they should make you feel that you had a good experience because that's part of their job. And so thank you note, good idea. But I don't think most schools are showing their cards after the interview.
No, and it's not a good question to ask. I mean, people who ask me, so how did I do after the interview? I'm not going to tell you that.
Yeah.
Right.
That
It
is
also
not.
shows a lack of confidence.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it does. And also the fact that you didn't get a response to your thank you note. They're not being rude. They just have gazillions of applications. All of us do.
right.
We don't have time. I mean, sometimes you might get an automatic answer, and don't take that the wrong way. It's not that we're not interested, but we don't have time. I mean, there's a finite amount of time between application submitted and the application deadline. And when you've got 10,000 applications, that's a lot to go through. That's a lot of paperwork. And we simply don't have time. That's why you probably are not getting a response.
Yeah. The other question I'm going to take before we move on, I know there's a bunch of questions coming in, and we'll address all of your questions. Don't worry about that. But Natish asked a question that's pretty interesting.
Mhm.
Wants to know if AdComs create pools based on geographies and then do a comparison with the pool. And I will tell you from our perspective, we did that, but not for the reason you're thinking. So Natisha's thinking that it's putting overrepresented populations at a disadvantage. We reviewed by geographies because we had experts in those school systems. So that allowed us to get a much better review of that particular school system and how people did within that system.
Mhm.
So if you're under the British system, it's, one type of review. If you're under the US system, it's another type of review. If you're under the Germanic system, it's another type of review. And we spent a lot of time training people to become experts in those areas. I'm curious, Kelly, what you did in terms of organizing the reads.
Yeah. So we actually did not organize the reads in any fashion. Our reads were assigned without kind of grouping. However, as the round goes on, you are comparing applicant groups to applicant groups, whether it's on a geographic basis or a background from a work experience or an educational experience. Your goal as an admissions committee is to admit a robust class that is not all the same candidate, is not all, the benefit of being in an MBA program, sitting alongside people from different backgrounds, different experiences, is the value that the students add to the experience. And so we would be doing a disservice to candidates if we weren't trying to assess groups against groups. And again, it's not just geographic, but it's from professional backgrounds as well as experiences.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question because it has to do with what we're talking about right now, which is, sort of the resumes and experience. And the question comes from Sruthi, who asks, does a gap year affect admissions chances? And Christy, why don't you address that? So someone was working or someone graduated from school, took a gap year, and then started working. How did that affect your reads at Talk?
It really is not, because whatever you're doing in that gap year, that's where you use your optional essay to tell us. You can say, I was burnt out. I just needed a break because I was involved in so much in college. Or you could say, I wanted to take the opportunity to expand my global consciousness, so I traveled for a year. Or it could be someone was ill in your family. So that's really not going to affect it as long as you explain what you were doing. And hopefully you were not just taking a year off from work to study for the GMAT exam, because that is a red flag, because everybody else who's applying is working too. And if you don't think you can do the GMAT, study for the GMAT while you're working, you may not be able to get through an MBA program because it's a lot of work. But I don't think the gap year affects it negatively at all. But again, use the optional essay to briefly explain what you were doing.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm going to take all the questions, don't worry. And you're welcome, Atish, and you're welcome, Simon. We'll look forward to talking to you later. I'm going to talk briefly about test scores, mostly because a lot of my clients are taking the GMAT focus this week. So the reason we use test scores and why during the pandemic they were optional is that they are really good predictors. Both the GRE and the GMAT are good predictors of success, academic success in the first year of the core. That doesn't mean that outliers, people that have lower test scores, don't do well. I mean, I know somebody that scored really low on their GMAT. That was one of our top students. In fact, I think he graduated top of his class. So it's not a predictor for everybody. It is a predictor on the aggregate. And that, together with all the other components of the application, is how we can determine whether or not you're a good fit. Because you have to be able to handle the program academically. So test scores are used in line with your transcripts, how you did in school, your grades, and we make that determination. We'll also look at the resume and your work experience to see whether or not you are showing things that are outliers in terms of test scores. So most schools don't really care if you use the GRE or the GMAT. And now it's the focused edition, the shorter version. Most of my clients have said they've enjoyed taking the shorter version. So just so you know that it's just one component, but it is an important component. Don't worry about whether or not you are above average or below average. Worry about whether or not you're showing that you can do the work academically. Okay? That's anybody else on test scores? No?
The only thing I would say is don't be concerned that the GMAT focus scores are typically lower than the
Right.
old GMAT score. Schools have a concordance table that will allow them to understand what the new score looks like as compared to the old score. So I know a lot of people are a little focused on the idea that, but I'm only getting a 680 instead of a 750. I'm not sure exactly that's the right conversion, but don't worry about that. Schools have been working with the Graduate Management Admission Council, and they're ready to understand those new scores.
Definitely.
Yeah, I just wrote a blog post about it, so you can check out accepted.com for that blog post too. Okay. Kelly, do you want to talk about references?
Sure. So recommendations are a part of the application where a third party provides an assessment of your candidacy. And for most often for MBA programs, this will be a professional relationship. There are some cases where a different relationship, an academic relationship would be acceptable, but make sure that you're understanding what the school's looking for. Most often it's going to be a professional relationship. Over the years, schools have decreased the number of recommendations. So you can see a school asking for only one. Perhaps there are some that may ask for two, and I even think you could see three, but I don't think those are too common anymore if schools are even asking for three. But make sure that you're thinking of someone who can make an observation of you in the workplace, who can speak to your day-to-day contributions at work and your potential for leadership. A direct supervisor, an indirect supervisor, maybe a former supervisor, if you don't want your current company to know that you're applying to MBA programs. Please know that title is not important. And I say this because the CEO is not going to, in most cases, is not going to have as much of a insight into your work as your direct supervisor. So I'll give you an example. When I was working at Georgetown, we had an application, and I remember the letter of recommendation came from Bill Clinton. I'm a little bit of a political junkie, so I thought that was cool. However, it was immediately clear that he had no day-to-day contact with this person. And so in the end, that recommendation didn't help that candidate at all. Mm-hmm. And so you want to make sure that you understand that the relationship that you need to seek out from your recommender is one that knows what you do at work and can speak to your impact.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that, Christy?
Yeah, and give your recommenders plenty of time to think about this. Bring up your past evaluations. That's the best way to remind them of the cool things you've done in case they've forgotten. Give them a copy of your resume, thank them, take them out to lunch or for coffee or whatever it is. But give them plenty of time to do it, because if you give it to them the week, oh, hey, I've got to have a recommendation by next week, they're not going to be able to really think about it and do a good job. And you want this person, the reason we ask for this is the only outside information we're getting on you, other than maybe the interview. But they're going to confirm that, hey, this is a real leader. This is a person who brings together a team and motivates people. This is a person who can fill in when we have a crisis. This person is there. That's the thing we're looking for. We don't want just a bunch of adjectives. We want examples. And so that's, and again, Kelly's example, we once got a candidate from Israel who's got his letter from Prime Minister Netanyahu, and it was 3 lines long. This candidate is a great soldier, and he has won marksmanship awards with the AK-47. We don't want that. No school wants to see that. I'm sorry. And so he did not get in. But you want somebody who knows you. And as Kelly said, it's not the official title. Obviously, you don't want somebody who reports to you, because that's considered ethically questionable, because you might retaliate against them. And a lot of times people have questions, should I waive my right to see the letter? It doesn't really make any difference. But, if you're writing something for somebody and you really want to go all out, your boss might not want you to know that they think you're that wonderful, because you might ask for a raise. Or if they had something negative to say about you, they don't want you to ruin your whole career focusing on one thing, because they're supposed to tell us about your weaknesses. I think that's all.
And I'm just going to address the "you write it, I'll sign it" boss. Is that happens quite a bit as well. And again, with ethics, that's not ethically okay. And we at Accepted will do a critique of the reference, but we're not going to help something that you've written. That's just not going to fly with us. So particularly as former admissions directors. So what I'm going to recommend that you do is actually 2 things. One, schedule a time for a meeting with your reference, an hour, and then say, you know what, I actually don't need this time, but I'm giving you this time to write the reference. The other thing you can do, in addition to the resume and your reviews, would be to look at the Graduate Management Admissions Council common letter of recommendation. And what I would do is look at the characteristics that schools are looking for and pick 2 or 3 characteristics that you want your recommender to highlight, and then just give them the examples of those 2 to 3 attributes that you offer. Give them examples of how you've, if it was influencing others, how you influenced a client or how you influenced members on your team to go in a direction that they weren't thinking about, and it was really successful. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're working through the references, but you write it, I'll sign it, doesn't work. So,
And there's also software now. All the schools have adopted software that can detect with fairly high frequencies. They look at metadata, and that means they can compare your writing in an essay to the writing in the letter. That's too similar, they're going to flag it. If it comes from the same computer they're using, or really obvious thing one time was somebody sent a letter from their reference who was supposed to be their boss, but the person was actually in an MBA program, and in the US. And no, that was not, they did not write the letter. And if we have any question about it all, we will call the recommender.
so Simon asks, does the recommendation play a big part in the evaluation? And if you can indicate by percent what the reference played, then he wants that. And I can tell you that we didn't use percentages in terms of what counts for what. That's what a holistic review is, that you don't have percentages of this reference counts for this and the test scores count for this. So we didn't use percentages. What I used references for was to affirm what the candidate said about his or herself, and also to add new information about the candidate that gave us some insight into whether or not that candidate would fit in well with our program, whether or not they shared the same values that we had. Anybody have anything else to say about references and whether or not they used percentages?
No.
We didn't use percentages either. And I think what you said, the affirmation of information, or if a recommender says something negative, that's often a little bit of a red flag, because you expect your recommender is going to be someone that you've talked to and you believe is going to give you a positive recommendation. The one thing that I would suggest that you do is you can go to the Graduate Management Admission Council's website, gmac.com, and search for the common letter recommendation, and you can actually download and see a copy of the form. It would be super helpful for you to understand what goes into that. The benefit of the common letter of recommendation, and not every school uses it, but many schools use it, is you can, your recommender can create a recommendation using the common letter of rec that they can then use the content for each school that uses that common letter of recommendation. So it reduces the amount of work on your recommender if the schools that you're applying to accept it. Some of the top schools don't use it, but many schools do use it. So get yourself a copy of that on gmac.com.
Kelly, most of the schools do use it, but some may add an additional question.
Absolutely.
So yeah. They're actually not listed as users, but they have the basic questions. The big change in that is Wharton. Wharton has their own questions. They're not even close to what the Graduate Management Admissions Council puts out. But I would say most schools use at least 90% of that recommendation. So it's a great idea to go on the website and download it. You can just Google Graduate Management Admissions Council, or GMAC, Common Letter of Recommendation, or Common LOR, and you will be able to access it. All right, we're going to move on to essays. And again, we'll get to some of your some of these questions a little later, like the waitlist question I'd like to deal with later. So thank you for that, Rakshit. And some of the ones that are very specific about chances. I, again, welcome you to come to the accepted.com website and have one of our consultants do a profile review for you. So if you have very specific questions about your own qualifications for a program, then get a complimentary review. We give a 30-minute review and, well, a 30-minute consultation. We're happy to talk to you about your profile. Okay. So again, accepted.com, and then you'll see a pop-up that says schedule a 30-minute consultation. All right. Essays. Christy, do you want to talk a little bit about how we use essays in a review?
This is something that during the summer, well, the end of the application season, schools spend lots of time going over it. Are we getting what we wanted out of the questions we asked last year? Do we need to make this shorter? Do we need to make it longer? And they're there for a purpose. They're there to find out whether you have the characteristics that we as a school are looking for. And each school is different. Just like you have different personalities, so do the schools. They're not there just to give you extra work and give us extra reading. Believe me, we don't need the extra reading. But they're there to find out more about you. Some schools will give you 100 words. And why is that? Because you need to have your goals down into a 60-second response. What can you do? What do you need to learn? And what are you going to do with it? That's all you have to say. So cut out all the unnecessary adjectives. Others, like Harvard, are 1,000 words, 5 or 6 pages. They do care, believe me, but they don't want to put a timeline on it. And you can actually hang yourself if you won't go on for 15 pages about who you are, because that shows that you cannot be brief and concise. And you're just rambling, and putting lots of hot air into it. So read the question. Do not tell us what you think we want to know. Tell us who you are and answer our question. Sometimes it's possible to cut and paste bits and pieces from one essay into another, but not always. And the biggest thing is watch your spelling. I think we're kind of going to get into this later. Don't put the wrong school's name in there. That happens all the time. And make sure that if we say, for example, I'm going to give you one that Vanderbilt uses, and we rarely get the answer we're asking for. It's what two paths do you think you're going to follow? You need to have a plan A and a plan B. And what skills do you now have? Half the time people don't even, I'm going to do this particular concentration and that particular concentration. They'll only give us one plan. They do not tell us what their skill set is or what they want to learn. So right there, you have not answered the question, which means you don't follow directions well. So, I mean, answering the question, there's no right answer, but there is an appropriate answer. That's, I guess, the best way I can put that. And
an engaging answer, right?
Yeah. And like I said, we're not asking this because we don't have anything better to do than read these essays. We want to know who you are. And we want to know briefly and concisely what you want to do with the MBA. And when I say concisely, I want to be a management consultant with McKinsey. Yeah, well, what's your specialty? Why would McKinsey want to hire you? Think about that. Explain yourself. I have this skill, and this skill. I would like to work with a firm that does that. I know you all have lots more to add to that, so I'll be quiet for a change.
Okay. Kelly, what do you want to say about essays?
I think Christy covered it. I know that we have about 11 minutes left, and I know that there are a couple of points left that we want to make. I would say that the thing that I always come back to is be authentic and make sure that the reader gets to know who you are. Authenticity, I think, is incredibly important.
Yeah. And as I mentioned before, I think you have to engage the reader also. one of the things that a former colleague of ours used to talk about, she's since retired, was helping our clients make their essays sing. And that is exactly what we do, is we help you make your essays sing. So even though we are helping you, you are still going to be your authentic self. You are going to be able to engage the reader, to read further about who you are and why you'd make a great candidate at that school. Okay. And Alex, I'm going to get to your question as well. But before we do that, I just want to briefly talk about videos and video essays. So we know that several schools now have video essays. Some of the video essays are run by a program, a platform called Kira, and you need to do these video essays after you hit the submit button. Often they will ask 2 or 3 questions. Many of these questions are published, and you need to answer them. So it's really a way for the committee to see if you can basically walk and chew gum at the same time. So they want to know how engaging you are in person before they even interview you. And for a school like Kellogg, it gives them another data point in addition to all the interviews that they're doing. It gives everybody another data point. There are some other schools that ask you to do a 1-minute video, like MIT Sloan will ask you to do a 1-minute video and introduce yourself. And with that, it's the same thing. Again, it's like an essay. You want to engage the person on the other end, and your audience is technically the admissions committee, but they're asking you to use the audience of a student. Introduce yourself to the admissions committee. They just want to know that you're really, again, engaging and that you're going to enjoy being in a case classroom and participate in cases. And a video essay helps an admissions committee assess that. The other real benefit of a video essay is that everybody on the committee can watch it. So it's not just one person that's looking at the video essay. If you come up for committee, we're playing the video essay. Okay, so it's an important aspect of the application, and it's left at the end, and just don't rush through that process. It's really important for you to do. Okay, I do want to take Alex had a question and about is it negative if a candidate applies to only one school? Alex, I'm going to take this briefly. I think you mean, is it negative when a school is asking you, like Duke asks you what other schools are you applying to? And if you only list one school, will they consider it negative? They might think it's strange. I mean, from my standpoint, I don't think you should put all your eggs in one basket. I think you should apply to multiple schools. You should have at least one reach school, one match school, and one safety. So at the very least, have 3. What I wind up working with quite a bit are people that only are applying to reach schools. And so we have this discussion. They don't have to work with me on their match schools. They don't have to work with me on their safety schools. And if they don't want to go to school outside of their reach schools, that's okay too. You know, that's a decision that you make. But is it negatively viewed? Not from the school's standpoint. You know, they might wonder why you're putting all your eggs in one basket. And so you will need to explain that. Rakshi, we'll get to waitlists in just a minute. I mean, we have 5 minutes left. We can go a little bit longer if you want to stay with us. We're happy to do that. But you know, to answer all these questions that we have. But if we don't answer your question, again, I'm going to invite you to join us at accepted.com. You can select one of our consultants, Kelly, Christy, myself, and our other colleagues, and just check the box, and one of us will answer these questions with you individually and give you a 30-minute complimentary consultation. Okay. So what I wanted to move into is, how did you use the interview? So we've talked about the entire application process, what happens after you submit, how we go through an application prior to the interview. Now we're interviewing you. Okay. How do you use the interview after you've conducted the interview? And, this might answer the question we talked about earlier with Kellogg, but let's go ahead and talk about what a blind interview is. So, Christy, can you touch base on what a blind interview is?
Yes. Now, a lot of schools have different people who interview you. It could be an alum. It could be a member of the admissions staff. It could be a second-year student. And the reason that they do blind interviews is because the information in your application is confidential. So all we're going to have is your resume. They don't know your test scores. They don't care about your test scores. They're not assessing your academic ability right now. They're assessing, what do you know? What do you know? What skills do you have? And more importantly, what do you know about us? Why are you applying to our school? And what makes you think that the Tuck program or the MIT program or the Stanford program is the right program for you outside of reputation? That's not what we're interested in. We know we're great schools. We know where we're located, and we know that we have a great career path. But what do you see in this program, in particular, faculty members who've done research that you're interested in, particular clubs that you're interested in, research centers that you want to work with? So if you don't know anything about the program other than what's on the website, that's going to show up. And believe me, students are the harshest critics of that. They want to know that you are gung-ho about their school, whether it's Kellogg, whatever school, Arizona, it doesn't matter, because this is the choice they've made. And if you don't know anything about it, well, how are you going to be involved? I think that's the key thing, that you need to know about the school. And it's really easy to find out about the school. Every school out there that I've ever seen has a page for student ambassadors. All you have to do is reach out to somebody and they will respond. They have volunteered to do this. And you can find out all kinds of insider information from the students. They're very honest about it. So do that before you do your interview, and make sure that you know your resume, but you're not going to repeat everything. That you give us the highlights of, this is what I'm really good at. This is what I need to improve on, and that's why I want to do an MBA. So the interview is really very personal. It also gives us a chance to evaluate your skills in English if you're an international student. That's not the main thing it's used for, but again, what do you know about an MBA? Do you understand what an MBA does? Because you'll find out in some interviews, people have no clue about an MBA. They say, I just want to do marketing. Well, I'm sorry, honey, but you're going to have to do finance as well and operations while you're in the program. So that's my 2 cents on that.
And unfortunately, our time is up, but we're going to stay on and continue with the session. If you want to stay on with us, that's great. If you have other questions, we're happy to answer those questions. You have these very individualized questions like Ramakrishnan. I'm happy to talk to you about negotiating scholarship on the accepted.com consultation. Not every school will negotiate, but I'm happy to do that because I've had success with that. Same thing with in terms of how Ross assesses fit with those very short questions. I asked myself this question because when I was there, we did not have those very short questions. So that's a great question. So again, we're happy to take those questions individually. If you go to the accepted site, you can click on profile, and then it'll take you to our scheduling platform, and you can go ahead and schedule a complimentary session with us. Okay, I'm going to quickly ask Kelly to describe a behavioral interview, because a lot of interviews are behavioral, and you need to know how to address a behavioral interview. So Kelly, can you go ahead and describe that?
Sure thing. So the purpose of a behavioral interview, or the thinking behind it, is that past experience predicts future behavior. So a school will use the behavioral interview to talk about your background in terms of experiences you've had. However, they will start the interview most likely with some general questions like why the MBA program, or why this MBA program, why the MBA in general. They may clarify questions on your resumes, and they're going to want to ask you what about your goals. So those are general questions, but maybe part of the behavioral interview as well. But specifically to the behavioral interview questions, it's usually going to focus on teamwork, leadership, maybe when you've succeeded or failed, demonstrated growth, those types of experiences. And so the questions will usually start with, tell me about a time when. I used to always start with, tell me about a time when you were in a leadership role, you faced a challenge, how did you approach it, and what was the resolution? And I would tell people that at information sessions, because it's not the question that's important. That first example that you provide, here's what I'd like to talk about. Really, the value for the school comes in the follow-up questions and the probing, because they're going to want to know, what else did you consider? Why did you make that decision? How did you handle their reaction? That's where the real value lies. So you want to make sure that you're literally talking about an example and not an amalgamation of several things that you're thinking of at the spur of the moment. So you can think about situations that you might want to talk about, and the format for your answer, there are different acronyms, but I'll talk about the STAR method. So you want to talk about the situation, the task at hand, the decision that you had to make, or the problem that you're trying to solve. And then you want to talk about that briefly, but you want to spend most of the time talking about the approach you took and the result of your actions. And so generally, that's the behavioral interview.
And some schools will do primarily a behavioral interview. Some might mix it up. I will say that, some interviews are blind, meaning the interviewer hasn't seen your application. And others are application informed interviews, meaning the school has seen your application. For example, Harvard does an application informed interview. You need to know your application, backwards and forwards. It's rapid fire. You'll get some behavioral questions. You'll get some questions that will be just very direct. I want to give you one caveat to interviews, and that is Wharton's team-based discussion. I'm going to discuss more about that on my session on March 25th, but essentially you're put into a team on Zoom with 5 other people, and you are asked to address an issue that is happening at Wharton, or come up with a course, or come up with an event. So you have to work together as a team to come up with a better idea. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in my March 25th session. Okay, I'm going to skip. Do we want to just offer some last minute, how do people stand out in their application? Can we do that? Kelly, can you say
Sure.
how people stand out? Yeah.
Yeah. So as I was thinking about this question, I was thinking mostly about the content that you're going to include in your essays. And before you jump to, here's the answer I'm going to use, you need to spend some time reflecting on what's been important in your life, what experiences have shaped who you are, what your values are, what drives you and what motivates you. It's once you kind of understand those things, you can really focus your essay on some meaningful and impactful examples. That's one of the benefits of working with us at Accepted is we can help you navigate that process. And so, I think crafting a standout application is making sure that you're putting the time into the essays before you even start writing.
Mhm.
Okay. Christy, do you have any last minute tips
Well, I've already
about application?
I've already said, get in touch with student ambassadors at the schools, find out about insider information, things that you can't find, and also have some questions of your own to ask after the interview. Not how did I do on the interview, but something that you can't find on the website. If you're interested in a particular field, like tell me really how involved is the school in energy? That's what I want to work in, renewable energy. Can you tell me some clubs or people I can talk to there who are in that field? And they will be happy to introduce you to other students who do that.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to go back to something we said earlier, be your authentic self. I think that's really important when you're crafting a great application. The schools will understand fit, and you just need to be your authentic self to see fit. So, again, I'm going to invite you to join us at accepted.com and get individual review, a complimentary consultation. And I want to thank my colleagues, Kelly Wilson and Christy St. John, for joining me today. I want to thank all of you for coming, spending your time with us to learn a little bit more about what happens after you submit your application. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.